They laughed at me, called me the paper pusher, the legacy code, the dinosaur who couldn't adapt to their brilliant new world. But I knew what they were building, a house of cards so fragile that one pulled thread would bring it all crashing down. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten. I just documented, waited, and calculated. And when that day finally came, when their $260 million empire crumbled into digital dust, I simply poured myself another cup of tea and smiled. They thought they were getting rid of dead weight. They never realized I was the foundation holding everything together. My name is Emily Warren, and for 6 years, I was the invisible spine of Arcturus Dynamics, not the face on the marketing materials, not the name dropped in TechCrunch articles, but the person who actually made sure the lights stayed on and the code kept running. I'd arrived at Arcturus when it was just 40 people crammed into a converted warehouse in East Austin, back when our biggest worry was whether the AC would survive another Texas summer. I built our payment processing system from scratch, configured every API endpoint, negotiated software licenses that saved us hundreds of thousands, and created the internal framework that everything, and I mean everything, ran on. While others pitched and promised, I delivered. The early days were good. Our founder, Marcus, understood that infrastructure wasn't sexy, but it was essential. He'd stop by my desk at 9:30 p.m. when I was still debugging, slide me a Red Bull, and say, "Warren, you're the reason we sleep at night." I believed him. I was naive enough to think competence and loyalty meant something. Then Marcus sold his shares and sailed off to find himself in Bali. Enter Ryan Hale. Ryan was everything Silicon Valley taught us to worship 34. Stanford MBA. Worked at 2 unicorns. Spoke in TED Talk soundbites. He swept into our Austin office wearing designer sneakers and carrying a vision to disrupt the disruptors. The board ate it up. The younger engineers practically genuflected when he walked by. From day one, he looked at me like I was furniture necessary but unremarkable. In his first all hands, he talked about trimming the fat and optimizing human capital. He made eye contact with everyone under 30. The rest of us might as well have been ghosts. The changes started small. My name disappeared from meeting invites. "Oh, Emily, we're moving to a more agile structure. We'll loop you in when we need technical details." Then my team started reporting to the new CTO. A 28-year-old Ryan poached from a competitor. "Just streamlining communication channels. Warren, nothing personal." But the real sign came when they hired what Ryan called innovation catalysts, kids fresh from coding boot camps who thought programming started with React and ended with whatever framework was trending on Twitter that week. They strutted around the office, talking about technical debt and legacy systems, while having no idea that the legacy system they mocked was the only thing keeping our $3 million per month SaaS platform from imploding. I watched them fumble through codebases I'd meticulously documented, watched them break integrations and blame the old architecture, watched Ryan praise their fresh perspectives, while my inbox filled with urgent tickets from customers experiencing outages. I started keeping records, every dismissed suggestion, every critical system they didn't understand, every shortcut that would eventually become a catastrophe. Not out of spite, at least not at first, but out of habit. Document everything. It was my cardinal rule. The whispers started in October. Restructuring, right-sizing, returning to startup mentality, words that meant the same thing they always meant. Somebody was getting axed. The smart money was on the customer service team, or maybe some of the QA engineers. Nobody looked at me. I'd been there too long, knew too much, had my hands in too many critical systems. Nobody realized that being essential and being valued were two very different things in Ryan Hale's Arcturus Dynamics. I remember the Tuesday when everything crystallized. It was 7:45 p.m., and I was fixing a database migration that one of the innovation catalysts had botched. Ryan walked past with Mason Grant, our CFO, a slick-talking numbers guy who'd turned financial forecasting into a creative writing exercise. They didn't see me behind my monitors. "Q4 is going to be beautiful," Mason said, clapping Ryan on the shoulder. Once we clear out the dead weight, our burn rate drops by 30%. The investors will love it, Ryan replied. Fresh talent, lower costs, higher multiples. We just need to handle the transitions carefully. They walked on, leaving me sitting in the blue glow of my screens, finally understanding where I stood in their grand vision. I wasn't a person who'd built their company's foundation. I was a line item on a spreadsheet, waiting to be deleted. The company retreat at Lake Travis should have been my first warning to start updating my resume, but I was still foolish enough to believe that 6 years of dedication meant something. They'd rented out an entire resort, one of those places with infinity pools and conference rooms that opened onto private beaches. Team building, Ryan called it, aligning our vision for the future. I drove out there on a Thursday morning in November, watching Austin's skyline disappear in my rearview mirror, replaced by hill country and water that sparkled like broken glass. The first day was all presentations and buzzwords. Ryan stood in front of floor-to-ceiling windows, the lake shimmering behind him like a backdrop from a motivational poster, talking about synergy and scaling with intention. I sat in the back row, taking notes nobody would ever read, watching the younger employees hang on his every word. That evening, they organized a cocktail mixer on the terrace. I nursed a glass of wine near the edge of the crowd, watching my colleagues cluster into predictable groups, the engineers arguing about programming languages, the sales team comparing commission stories, the executives holding court near the bar. Around 9:30 p.m., I stepped outside for air. The November wind off the lake was sharp enough to cut through my blazer, but I needed the cold to clear my head. That's when I heard them. Ryan, Mason, and 2 investors I recognized from board meetings were gathered on a private balcony 1 level up, their voices carried on the wind, loose with alcohol and arrogance. "The burn rate is killing us," one investor said. "We need to see dramatic cuts before the next funding round." "Already on it," Ryan replied. I could hear the smile in his voice. "We've identified the redundancies, mostly legacy staff who can't adapt to our new velocity." Mason laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "Emily Warren, for instance, she's sitting on a principal engineer salary for maintaining some scripts. We've got kids from boot camp who can do that for 1/3 of the cost." "Emily," the investor sounded uncertain. "Isn't she the one who built your core infrastructure?" "Built, past tense," Ryan said. "That's the problem with these long-time employees. They think they're irreplaceable because they wrote some code 5 years ago. But legacy code is just technical debt. We need builders, not maintainers." "She's a relic," Mason added. "Still thinks documentation matters more than disruption. Last week, she sent me a 12-page report about system vulnerabilities. 12 pages. I told her to summarize it in a Slack message." They all laughed. The sound echoed across the water, mixing with the distant music from the party inside. When the investor asked, "After the holidays," Ryan said, "we'll package it as a reorganization, generous severance to keep things quiet. By Q1, we'll have a lean, hungry team ready to execute." "What about the systems she manages?" "Please," Mason scoffed. "It's not rocket science. The new kids are smart. They'll figure it out. And if something breaks, we'll hire a contractor to fix it, still cheaper than keeping her around." I stood there in the cold, wind whipping my hair across my face, feeling something inside me crystallize into ice. Not anger. Anger was hot and reckless. This was colder, more precise, the kind of clarity that comes when you finally see exactly where you stand. They kept talking, but I'd heard enough. I walked back through the resort, past the laughter and music, past my colleagues who didn't know they were drinking with executioners. I went to my room, opened my laptop, and began reviewing every contract, every system architecture, every piece of code I'd written for Arcturus Dynamics. And there it was, buried in subsection 4C of the framework licensing agreement I'd drafted 3 years ago when we'd incorporated my infrastructure system. A single paragraph I'd added after a previous company had tried to push me out without compensation. Legal had reviewed it, but they'd been focused on the liability clauses. They never paid attention to the technical continuity requirements. If the framework's operational continuity was disrupted without proper transition protocols that only I fully understood, the entire system would default to compliance lock. And the beautiful part: the framework wasn't owned by Arcturus. It was licensed from Warren Systems LLC, my personal consulting company that I'd maintained for tax purposes. I sat on that hotel bed, looking out at the dark lake, and felt my mouth curve into a smile. They thought I was a relic, dead weight, a line item to be deleted. They had no idea they were about to learn the difference between building something and understanding how it actually worked. Back home in my duplex in Hyde Park, I pulled out the fireproof safe from my closet. Inside, beneath my passport and birth certificate, lay 7 years of meticulous documentation, not just code and contracts, but the entire DNA of Arcturus Dynamics' technical infrastructure. People thought I was paranoid for keeping paper copies. Everything's in the cloud. Warren, they'd say. But clouds evaporate, servers crash, access gets revoked. Paper, locked in a safe that only I knew the combination to, was permanent. I spread the documents across my dining room table like a general planning a campaign. There were the original architecture diagrams I'd drawn on graph paper when Arcturus was still running on borrowed servers, the API documentation that mapped every endpoint, every authentication protocol, every rate limit, the dependency charts showing how each service connected to the others like a vast neural network. And there, in a manila folder marked Legal 2021, was the crown jewel, the framework licensing agreement. I'd been smart about it, though I hadn't realized how smart until now. When I built the core framework that Arcturus ran on, I didn't do it as an employee creating work product. I did it as a contractor through Warren Systems LLC, my consulting company. During a brief period when Arcturus had cash flow issues and couldn't make payroll, they'd paid my company for the work, and I'd licensed the framework back to them rather than transferring ownership. The licensing agreement was a masterpiece of protective paranoia. Clause 4C, buried on page 17, was titled Operational Continuity and Compliance Requirements, in plain English. It meant that if Arcturus modified the framework without maintaining proper technical continuity, defined as consistent operational oversight by qualified personnel familiar with the system's core architecture, the license would automatically trigger a compliance review mode. And who determined what constituted qualified personnel? Warren Systems LLC, of course. But the real beauty was in the technical implementation. 3 years ago, during a routine security update, I'd embedded a dormant monitoring protocol into the framework's core. It was completely legitimate, a safeguard against unauthorized modifications that could compromise system integrity. Every month, it performed a silent check, verifying that key operational parameters remained within acceptable ranges. If those parameters shifted beyond thresholds, say, if someone started making massive changes without understanding the underlying dependencies, the system would begin a graduated response. First, warnings in the logs that only someone who knew where to look would notice. Then, performance degradation. As the system started quarantining modified components. Finally, if the issues weren't resolved, full compliance lock. The trigger wasn't malicious code or a backdoor. It was a feature, documented and disclosed, designed to prevent exactly what Ryan and his bootcamp kids were about to attempt: reckless modification of critical infrastructure by people who didn't understand what they were breaking. I pulled up my laptop and logged into the monitoring dashboard through a VPN. Everything was still green, humming along perfectly. The new kids hadn't started their improvements yet, but they would. Ryan's type always did. They'd come in with their modern frameworks and their microservices architecture, trying to refactor code they didn't understand, breaking connections they didn't know existed. The irony was delicious. I'd built the system to be robust, self-healing, able to handle massive loads and gracefully degrade under pressure, but I'd also built it to be intricate, interconnected in ways that weren't immediately obvious. Every optimization I'd made over 6 years created dependencies that weren't documented in the code comments. They were documented, of course, in the hundreds of pages of technical specifications sitting in my safe. Specifications that Arcturus didn't have copies of. Because Ryan had declined to renew my documentation repository subscription 6 months ago. "We need to be more agile," he'd said. "Less documentation, more iteration." I made myself a cup of tea Earl Grey, imported from a small shop in London, and sat down to review my options. I could warn them, try to negotiate a proper transition, but they'd already made their decision on that balcony at Lake Travis. I was dead weight to them, a relic to be discarded. Or I could do nothing, simply wait for them to trigger their own downfall through arrogance and ignorance. The framework would protect itself, as I'd designed it to, and when everything started falling apart, when their $260 million valuation started crumbling, they'd have no one to blame but themselves. I opened a new notebook, leather-bound, with pristine cream pages, and began writing. Not code this time, but a timeline. A prediction of exactly how the next few months would unfold. Every mistake they'd make, every system they'd break, every crisis they'd create through their own hubris. At the top of the first page, I wrote, "The Fall of Arcturus Dynamics, a Technical Prophecy." Below that, in smaller letters, "They laughed at my warnings. They won't be laughing for long." The email came on a Tuesday morning in December, 2 weeks after the retreat. Subject: Strategic Workforce Optimization Meeting. Corporate speak for execution day. I arrived at the office at 8:45 a.m., my usual time, carrying my usual coffee from the usual place, everything normal, everything routine, as if I hadn't spent the previous night backing up 6 years of personal files and removing my few personal items from my desk drawer. The HR director, Sandra, was already waiting in conference room C, the one they used for firings because it was farthest from the main floor. Less chance of scenes, fewer witnesses to uncomfortable exits. She had that practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes, a manila folder placed precisely in front of her, a box of tissues positioned within easy reach. "Emily, please, have a seat," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her, the one that faced away from the door, the trapped chair. Ryan was there too, trying to look somber but unable to hide the satisfaction in his eyes. Mason sat to his left, scrolling through his phone, already mentally moving on to the next item on his agenda. "Emily," Ryan began, "first, I want to thank you for your years of service to Arcturus." I sipped my coffee and said nothing. Let him perform his script. "As you know, the company is evolving. We're entering a new phase of growth that requires different skill sets, more agile methodologies. We've made the difficult decision to eliminate several positions that no longer align with our forward trajectory." "Including mine," I said, keeping my voice flat, professional. Sandra jumped in with rehearsed compassion. "We're offering a generous severance package, 3 months' salary, continued health benefits through Q1, and of course, we'll provide positive references for your job search." I set down my coffee cup with deliberate precision. "I'll need full documentation of all systems I've managed, for my records." Sandra blinked. "I'm sorry." "The technical documentation, system architectures, API specifications, dependency charts, I authored them, and I'll need copies for my portfolio." Mason finally looked up from his phone. "That's proprietary information." "That I created," I said. "I'm not asking for code or customer data, just documentation of my work. It's standard for technical positions." They exchanged glances. Ryan shrugged. "Sandra, make sure she gets copies of whatever documentation she authored." He had no idea what he'd just agreed to. None of them did. Sandra pushed the separation agreement across the table. "We'll need your signature on this. It includes a standard non-compete and non-disclosure agreement." I read every line, making them wait in uncomfortable silence. The non-compete was laughably narrow. I couldn't work for direct competitors in the SaaS space for 6 months. The NDA was standard, protecting customer information and trade secrets. Nothing about the framework license, nothing about Warren Systems LLC. I signed with my favorite pen, the Mont Blanc I'd bought myself after my first year at Arcturus. "I'll need copies of all signed documents." "Of course," Sandra said, relief visible on her face that I wasn't crying or arguing. "It will deactivate your access at noon. You can take an hour to pack your personal items." "That won't be necessary," I said, standing. I travel light. Before leaving the room, I turned to Ryan. One question. Who's taking over framework maintenance? He smiled, that confident, dismissive smile I'd come to know so well. The whole team will handle it. We're moving to a more distributed model. No single points of failure. I nodded slowly. No single points of failure. Smart. The walk to my desk felt like a funeral procession in reverse. I was the corpse, walking myself to the grave while everyone averted their eyes. A few brave souls murmured condolences. The boot camp kids didn't even look up from their screens. I had one final task. At 11:58 a.m., 2 minutes before my access would be revoked, I pushed one last commit to the repository. A simple configuration update, thoroughly documented, completely legitimate. It adjusted the framework's monitoring sensitivity, making it more responsive to structural changes. The commit message read, "Enhanced compliance monitoring per security audit recommendations." No one would question it. Security updates were routine, and technically, it wasn't a trap or sabotage. It was a feature activation, making the system more vigilant about protecting itself from incompetent modifications. I walked out of Arcturus Dynamics at 12:01 p.m., carrying nothing but my coffee cup and my dignity. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for a moment, watching the building that had been my second home for 6 years. Then I opened my phone and made a single calendar entry for January 15th. Watch the dominoes fall. As I drove away, I didn't look back. There was nothing to see yet. The fuse was lit, but the explosion would take time. The beauty of a well-designed system is that it fails gracefully at first, degrading so slowly that by the time anyone notices, it's already too late to stop the cascade. They thought they were deleting dead weight. They had no idea they'd just armed the bomb. The first cracks appeared on January 3rd, subtle as hairline fractures in glass. I was sitting in Epic Coffee on North Loop, laptop open to my anonymous monitoring dashboard, watching the Arcturus system metrics like a seismologist tracking tremors before an earthquake. The bootcamp kids had started their optimizations right after the holidays, eager to prove their worth in the new year. Customer dashboard load times increased by 200 milliseconds, nothing a user would notice, but I saw it. Then the API response delays, creeping up from 50 milliseconds to 70, then 90. The system was beginning to resist. By January 8th, the internal Slack channels were lighting up. I still had access through a former colleague's account. She'd shared it months ago for a collaborative project and forgotten to revoke it. The messages painted a beautiful picture of confusion. Anyone else seeing sync issues with the payment processor? Dashboard analytics stuck in pending for anyone else. Why is the staging environment rejecting deployments? The bootcamp kids were baffled. They kept pushing fixes that made things worse, like tightening a knot by pulling both ends. One particularly arrogant junior developer named Tyler wrote, "This legacy code is fighting every improvement. We should just rebuild from scratch." If only he knew how prophetic that statement would become. On January 10th, Mason's financial report started glitching. The CFO who'd laughed about my 12-page vulnerability report was now unable to generate basic revenue forecasts. The numbers would calculate, freeze, then reset. The framework's compliance monitoring had identified his reporting module as compromised too many unauthorized modifications to the data pipeline I'd carefully calibrated over 3 years. I watched from my coffee shop perch as panic emails flew back and forth. Ryan demanded answers. The CTO blamed the cloud provider. The cloud provider's logs showed everything running normally on their end. Because it was. The framework wasn't broken, it was protecting itself exactly as designed. January 12th brought the first customer complaints. Enterprise clients noticed their automated workflows stuttering. API calls that should take milliseconds were timing out. The support team was overwhelmed, but they couldn't escalate properly because the internal ticketing system, another component integrated with the framework, was experiencing synchronization issues. The beautiful irony was that every attempted fix triggered more protection protocols. The framework detected patterns consistent with system compromise, rapid changes by unrecognized operators. modifications that broke established dependencies, deletions of what it considered critical safeguards. So it did what I'd programmed it to do. It started quarantining the threats. By January 14th, they brought in external consultants. I recognized the firm SecureTech Solutions, known for their emergency response teams. They charged $15,000 per day, minimum 3-day engagement. I sipped my afternoon tea and watched their futile attempts to diagnose the problem. The consultants immediately identified that something was triggering protection protocols, but they couldn't understand what or why. Every time they tried to trace the issue, they hit walls, not error messages or crashes, but smooth redirects to compliance checks they couldn't bypass. One consultant's report, leaked to the company Slack, used the phrase, architecturally brilliant, but operationally opaque. I'd take that as a compliment. On January 15th, my calendar reminder popped up. Watch the dominoes fall, right on schedule. The framework escalated to Stage 2 protection. This wasn't gradual degradation anymore. This was active quarantine of compromised components. The payment processing system locked first, entering what the system called compliance verification mode. Customers could still pay, but Arcturus couldn't process refunds, modifications, or new subscription tiers. The billing team went into meltdown. Then the customer dashboard started displaying a new banner: System maintenance in progress. Full functionality will resume upon compliance verification. Nobody at Arcturus had coded that message. It was built into the framework's DNA, a warning I'd written 3 years ago and forgotten about until now. The Slack channels devolved into finger-pointing and blame. Development blamed operations. Operations blamed security. Security blamed the consultants. The consultants blamed the architecture. Ryan scheduled emergency meetings at 7 a.m., noon, and 6 p.m., demanding solutions that nobody could provide. The most delicious moment came when Tyler, the boot camp kid who wanted to rebuild everything, made a critical discovery. "Guys," he wrote in Slack, "I found something. This framework isn't owned by us. It's licensed from some company called Warren Systems LLC." The channel went silent for 3 full minutes. Then Mason typed, "Who owns Warren Systems LLC?" Another pause before someone from legal responded, "Checking now." I closed my laptop and walked to the counter for another Earl Grey. When I returned, the Slack channel had exploded. My name appeared in every other message, ranging from confusion to anger to desperate pleas for help. But the best message, the one I screenshot for posterity, came from Ryan. "Someone get Emily on the phone, now." My phone, sitting silent beside my laptop, showed 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and 97 emails. I turned it face down and opened my notebook, the leather-bound one where I'd been documenting the collapse. Under January 15th, I wrote, "They finally understand they weren't deleting dead weight. They were cutting their own throat." The emergency board meeting was scheduled for January 16th at 2 p.m. I knew because Sandra from HR had accidentally included me on the calendar invite before hastily rescinding it. But the damage was done. I'd already seen the attendee list full board of directors, legal team, Ryan, Mason, CTO, and someone ominously listed as crisis management consultant. I decided to work from a different coffee shop that day, one with a clear view of the Arcturus building. I wanted to watch the expensive cars arrive. The panic made manifest in German engineering and rushed valet parking. By 2:30 p.m., the meeting had devolved into chaos. I knew because Tyler, bless his naive heart, was live tweeting the meltdown in the company Slack, apparently unaware that 40% of the company could see his messages. "Legal just said we might be in breach of license agreement." Mason threw his laptop across the room. Ryan trying to explain why nobody knew about Warren Systems LLC. Board member just asked if this constitutes gross negligence. CTO admitted he can't fix it without Emily. You could hear a pin drop. Someone just mentioned the number 260 million. I think that's our valuation. Was our valuation. At 3:15 p.m., the framework escalated to Stage 3. I watched it happen in real time on my monitoring dashboard. The compliance lock engaged with surgical precision. Every system dependent on the framework, which was to say, every system displayed the same message. Compliance lock engaged. Please contact your system administrator, Warren Systems, LLC. The customer-facing impact was immediate and catastrophic. 2,300 enterprise clients suddenly couldn't access their dashboards. Payment processing froze completely. The API returned nothing but 403 forbidden errors. The status page automatically updated to show every single service as major outage. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then another, and another. I finally checked the transcripts. Emily, this is Ryan. We need to talk. Please call me back immediately. Ms. Warren, this is David Kellerman from Arcturus's legal team. We need to discuss the framework license urgently. Emily, it's Mason. Look, we may have had our differences, but this is destroying the company. Please. The last voicemail was different. It was from Marcus, the original founder. Calling from Bali. Emily, I just heard. I'm so sorry about how they treated you. For what it's worth, I would have never let this happen. You were the backbone of everything we built. At 4 p.m., the journalists started calling. TechCrunch had picked up the story. Arcturus Dynamics suffers complete system failure. Millions of users locked out. The information was running with SaaS unicorn in crisis as technical infrastructure collapses. Someone had leaked that the failure was connected to a licensing dispute with a former employee. My LinkedIn inbox exploded with connection requests from reporters, competitors, and recruiters who smelled blood in the water. The board meeting, according to Tyler's increasingly frantic updates, had devolved into a discussion of legal liability. The investors were threatening to sue for mismanagement. Ryan was trying to shift blame to the CTO. The CTO was showing emails where Ryan had dismissed concerns about the framework ownership. Mason had apparently left the building entirely. At 4:30 p.m., they made the call I'd been expecting. It wasn't Ryan or Mason or even legal. It was Barbara Hendricks, the lead board member, a woman who'd built and sold 3 companies and had no patience for excuses. Ms. Warren, she said when I finally answered, I'm going to skip the pleasantries. We're facing a complete system failure that's costing us $3 million per hour in lost revenue and potentially destroying relationships with every enterprise client we have. Our market cap has effectively evaporated. I've just been informed that you own the license to the framework our entire system runs on, and that this collapse is due to a compliance lock triggered by unauthorized modifications. Is this accurate? Substantially, I replied, taking another sip of tea. What would it take to resolve this? I let the silence stretch for 5 seconds. Have you reviewed Clause 4C of the licensing agreement? Papers rustled in the background. I'm looking at it now. It requires... Jesus Christ. It requires the original system architect to personally verify and approve all major modifications. That would be me. And you were terminated in December. I was told I was dead weight. Legacy code, that bootcamp kids could do my job for 1/3 of the cost. Barbara's laugh was bitter. Those bootcamp kids just cost us our company. What do you want, Emily? I want you to understand something, I said, my voice calm as still water. I didn't sabotage your system. I didn't plant malicious code. I built protection protocols to prevent exactly what happened: unqualified people making destructive changes to critical infrastructure. Your team triggered every single safeguard through their own incompetence. I understand. What do you want? I looked out at the Arcturus building, where I'd spent 6 years of my life building something they'd dismissed as trivial. Check your email in 1 hour. I'll send my terms. The emergency investor call was scheduled for 4 p.m. on January 17th. By then, Arcturus had been completely dark for 26 hours. The tech press was having a field day. The day the SaaS died was trending on Twitter. Competitors were circling like vultures, offering refugees from our platform emergency migration assistance. I didn't send terms to Barbara. I didn't need to. The framework would deliver my message for me. At exactly 4 p.m., as the investors dialed into their emergency call, the compliance lock screen on every Arcturus system updated. Where it once showed my company name, it now displayed a countdown timer, automatic data purge in 72,000. My phone rang immediately. Barbara again. What the hell is this? Check the licensing agreement, Section 7B, I said. In the event of sustained compliance failure exceeding 30 days, all data processed through the framework will be automatically purged to prevent potential security breaches. 30 days. It's been 2 days. The compliance failure started when your team began their modifications on January 3rd. The system has been documenting every violation. You're looking at the aggregate timeout. I heard muffled swearing, papers shuffling, then Barbara's voice, tighter now. The investor call is starting in 2 minutes. Half our enterprise clients are threatening to sue. Our D&O insurance carrier is already making noise about gross negligence exemptions. Emily, what do you want? Put me on the investor call. What? Add me to the investor call. Let me explain what happened. Full transparency. Silence. Then hold on. 3 minutes later, I was patched into a conference call with 12 investors representing $900 million in deployed capital. I recognized voices from various Sand Hill Road firms, some New York hedge funds, and at least one sovereign wealth fund representative. Who the hell is this? Someone demanded. This is Emily Warren, I said. Former head of compliance and systems at Arcturus Dynamics, current owner of Warren Systems LLC, which licenses the core framework your entire investment runs on. The line went silent. Gentlemen, ladies, you're probably wondering how a $260 million company can be brought to its knees by one former employee. The answer is simple. It can't. I didn't bring Arcturus down. Ryan Hale and Mason Grant did that themselves when they decided that the person who built and maintained their critical infrastructure was expendable dead weight. This is extortion. Ryan's voice cut in. No, I replied calmly. Extortion would be if I threatened to destroy your system unless you paid me. I'm not destroying anything. Your system is protecting itself from your incompetence, exactly as designed and documented. You triggered every failsafe through willful negligence. How much to fix it? An investor asked bluntly. There is no fix. The framework license was terminated the moment Arcturus violated the continuity clause. You can't patch your way out of a legal agreement. Then what? You need a new license from Warren Systems LLC. My terms are non-negotiable. Ryan Hale and Mason Grant resign immediately. Full severance payment to every employee they terminated in their optimization plus 50% penalty. And Arcturus pays Warren Systems LLC a one-time licensing fee of $8 million for a new framework agreement. The explosion of voices was immediate and visceral. I heard Ryan screaming about lawsuits, Mason threatening criminal charges, investors demanding explanations. Barbara's voice cut through the chaos. Everyone shut up. The call went silent. Emily, walk me through the math. Current burn rate from the outage $3 million per hour. You've been down 26 hours. That's $78 million in lost revenue. Add the lawsuits from enterprise clients. Probably another $50 million. The cost to rebuild from scratch without my framework, 6 months minimum. $40 million in development costs. Plus the complete loss of customer trust. Total damage over $200 million. My price $8 million and some overdue justice. This is insane. Ryan started. Ryan, one of the investors interrupted. You're done talking. Barbara, take the deal. I need board approval for... You have it, 3 investors said simultaneously. At 4:30 p.m., I received the DocuSign for the new licensing agreement. Ryan and Mason's termination letters were attached, effective immediately. The payments to wrongfully terminated employees would process within 48 hours. I signed the agreement from my laptop in the coffee shop, then entered a single command into my monitoring dashboard. The compliance lock disengaged. Systems began spinning back up. Within minutes, green lights started appearing across the status board. The timer disappeared, replaced with system restored. Welcome back. 3 million users regained access. Enterprise clients' workflows resumed. The bleeding stopped, though the scars would remain. My phone buzzed with a text from Barbara. The framework is unlocked. Ryan and Mason are out. Your $8 million will wire tomorrow. I have one question. Would you consider coming back as CTO? I looked at the message for a long moment, then typed my reply. No, but I'll send you a list of people who actually know what they're doing. Good luck. I closed my laptop, finished my tea, and walked out into the Austin evening. Somewhere across town, Ryan was cleaning out his office. Mason was probably calling his lawyer. The bootcamp kids were learning that there's a difference between writing code and understanding systems. And I was finally free. 3 weeks later, I sat in the Austin train station, a worn paperback in my hands, phone switched off and tucked away in my bag. The $8 million had cleared 2 days after the agreement was signed. The wrongfully terminated employees had received their payments. Arcturus had stabilized, though their valuation had dropped to $90 million, a third of what it once was. The tech press had moved on to the next scandal, though pulling an Emily Warren had briefly become Silicon Valley slang for a spectacular revenge exit. LinkedIn messages from CEOs wanting to ensure their own Emily Warrens were properly valued had flooded my inbox before I deactivated the account. Ryan Hale was reportedly taking time to reflect on his leadership journey. Translation radioactive to any board that Googled his name. Mason Grant had started a podcast about failing forward that no one listened to. The bootcamp kids had scattered to other startups, hopefully humbler and wiser. Barbara had sent one final email. Arcturus survived because of what you built. We forgot that foundation matters more than decoration. Thank you for the expensive reminder. I hadn't replied. There was nothing left to say. A young woman sat down beside me, laptop covered in startup stickers, frantically typing code. She was muttering about deadlines, about impossible demands from executives who didn't understand technical debt. I recognized the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of being essential but not valued. For a moment, I considered warning her, telling her to document everything, to protect her work, to know her worth, but she wouldn't listen. We never do. Not until we learn the hard way. Instead, I opened my book and found my place. It was an old science fiction novel about engineers on a space station, keeping humanity alive in the void. The engineers were never the heroes of the story. They were background characters, mentioned only when something broke, but without them, everyone would have died in Chapter 1. My train arrived at 5:15 p.m., Austin to Seattle, a fresh start with enough money to build something of my own this time, something where the engineers wouldn't be afterthoughts or dead weight, but partners in creation. As the train pulled away, I caught a glimpse of the Arcturus building in the distance, its lights blazing against the coming dusk. Somewhere in there, my framework was still running, still protecting itself, still keeping the lights on. They'd need to treat it, and whoever they hired to maintain it, with respect this time. The alternative was coded into its DNA. I pulled out my notebook, the leather-bound one where I'd documented the collapse, and turned to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote, "Lessons from the Fall." Below it, my first entry. They called me deadweight, legacy code, a relic. They thought expertise was obsolete, that experience could be downloaded from a boot camp, that the people who build foundations are less valuable than those who paint the walls. They learned otherwise. The cost of their education, $200 million, and the near death of their company. The cost of my revenge, nothing but patience. Because I didn't have to destroy them. I just had to stop saving them from themselves. The train rolled north through Texas hill country as the sun set behind us. In my bag was a job offer from a Seattle startup CTO position, equity stake, and a board that understood that the person who builds the foundation should probably be involved in deciding how to renovate the house. But I wasn't sure I'd take it. With $8 million, I could build my own company, one where the engineers were partners, not expendable resources, where documentation was valued, not mocked, where building something that lasted mattered more than moving fast and breaking things. I closed the notebook and watched the landscape blur past. Somewhere behind me, Arcturus dynamics would survive, scarred but functional. They'd tell the story differently, Of course, the official version would minimize my role, paint the crisis as a technical glitch rather than karma coming to collect. But I knew the truth. The boot camp kids knew it. Barbara knew it. And late at night, when Ryan couldn't sleep, when he remembered that November evening on the lakeside balcony when he'd laughed about firing me, he knew it too. They'd all learned the same expensive lesson: never mistake quiet competence for weakness. Never assume the person maintaining the foundation is expendable. And never, ever laugh at someone who warns you about the consequences of your own ignorance. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't destroying what someone built. It's letting them destroy it themselves, then charging them $8 million to undo their own damage. I smiled, opened my book, and let the Texas darkness swallow the past. Seattle was waiting, and with it, a future where I'd never be dead weight again. The train rolled on, carrying me toward whatever came next. Behind me, my framework kept running, a ghost in the machine, protecting Arcturus from its own worst impulses. They'd called me Legacy Code. They had no idea how right they were. I was the legacy that would haunt them forever. Thank you so much for listening to this story of corporate revenge and poetic justice. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Drop a comment, and let's connect. If you enjoyed Emily's tale of patient vengeance, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts below. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a similar situation where someone's true value was only recognized after they were gone? I'd love to hear your stories. Until next time, remember, document everything, know your worth, and never let them treat you like dead weight.